right. So on to point two. Um, so in point two, I'm going to talk about, well, there's a lot of areas where we can cut the budget and cut spending, obviously, but what's the biggest, most critical one? Defense spending. So largest part of the federal budget is defense spending. Um, it's over $1 trillion now. Every year it goes up, by the way. There's been no credible effort to cut defense spending, and you can't cut the national debt without addressing this. Just by the numbers, and by the way, I'm trying to focus on things. Again, these 10 points are things that we can all agree on. I think everybody can agree that we can't afford to spend $1 trillion on defense when we're 38 trillion in debt. That's just insane. So, so by the numbers, the U.S. spends more on defense than the next nine countries combined. U.S. has somewhere between, you can't even get a clear answer on this, probably because the Defense Department of Defense never passed an audit, but it's somewhere between 750 and 900 bases outside the U.S. in 80 different countries. One source says there's 120 in Japan alone, 115 in Germany. It's hard to even say that with a straight face. 44 in Italy. And so on down the line until you end up at 750, between 750 and 900. If you've ever been in a company or worked in a company where people are working internationally, and you have a sense of the amount of money that gets spent on a day-to-day basis, housing people, infrastructure, all the civilian employees, the food, the daily expenses, housing, and so on. It's to do that in a private company is extremely expensive to work internationally. Imagine doing that with 900 or 750 to 900 military bases around the world, not including all the civilians alongside those people. You're like, it's hard to fathom how much that would even cost. Oh yeah, it costs $1 trillion. It's higher than any other segment of spending in the federal government, including health, education, research. No other country does this. And by the way, it's not like we're spending in wartime or something. There's no threat to the country. Nobody's actively trying to invade the country. The money is actually being spent to police the world in foreign interventions that aren't really American business. Um, and again, depending on your persuasion, even if you think that's a good idea, like we should be involved in this conflict, or we should be involved in that, or we should go bomb. Maybe you think it's a good idea to go take over Venezuela. I don't know why you would, but maybe you think that's a good idea. Maybe you think it's a good idea to go bomb Iran. Okay, you can have your opinions. Ultimately, you can't afford it anymore. Credit cards tapped out. You can't afford it anymore. So the military needs to be tasked with doing more with less. And let me say now, as I spoke a little bit about myself earlier, I'm good at building a strategy and executing a plan. What the military is very good at, from my understanding, is taking a mission and then figuring out how to accomplish the mission. So if we change the mission from, sit down with the military and change the mission from here's a massive amount of money and we want you to spend it internationally on all kinds of international interests. That was the old plan. If the new plan now is we're going to work on less money and focus internally on things that we actually need, then they'll have to figure out how to accomplish that mission. And I believe that they can. So along those lines, same thing as I said before, I would cut all foreign aid and defense money, all the defense spending that gets spent in foreign governments and foreign corporations would all stop. It's all, and by the way, that's all foreign coercion, financial coercion in disguise as military aid. Um, it's also, by the way, it's just good business. It's when you get into the business of policing foreign countries, you make enemies and you put people off sides, and it's bad for business. We need, if we're going to increase government revenues or increase the country's revenues to try to pay down this debt, we need more friends in the world. We need to attract countries to buy our stuff, buy stuff that we need, we need to work together with people, not against people. So instead of trying to figure out taking sides in different conflicts and trying to figure out which one we should fight and which ones we shouldn't fight, we should get back to saying that's bad business. Let's focus on getting some business done. And by the way, I'll also say at this point, this is all driven by lobbyists. These are not altruistic purposes around the world. These are lobbyists who are taking this money and increasing the debt for their own payments, either to foreign governments or military contractors and so on. They're the ones taking the bulk of that $1 trillion. It's not being spent on military personnel. It's being spent on industries and military contractors and foreign interests. So how would I do that? And then getting back to my plan, I have 5 points to my plan if you want to count the fifth one. So number one, I would start in that first year's budget. I would cut the military defense spending by 50%. And again, this is not an idea off the top of my head. The current president at one point proposed to cut the military spending by 50% before the special interests and the lobbyists got to him. But that's already an idea that was floated out there. I would just say that I would execute on that plan. That's a great idea. Let's cut the defense budget by 50%. And then we would propose that in the budget and get Congress to agree to that. Anybody who votes against a budget with that cut, where the loyalties of those Democrats and Republicans lie. They don't lie with you and what's good for you. They lie with the military industrial complex. Number two, I would close all the external bases. The Department of Defense is supposed to be defensive, defending the country. It doesn't need to be an offensive thing with all these bases around the world, and it's just a massive amount of spending. We could spend that money in better places or inside the country, cut the external bases. Number three, the Department of Defense has not passed an audit. We need to figure out, if you're going to figure out how to spend this money better, you need to figure out where the money's going. So we need to insist and get a Secretary of Defense in there who is focused on getting an audit completed of where this money is actually going. Right now, we don't actually know. So number three is we want to make sure that that where the money is going and make sure that it's being spent on good resources in the Department of Defense, like troops and veterans, and not consultants and industries. Number four, all of those troops that are in international bases, I would bring them home. I would bring those troops back into the country. I would once we've audited the Department of Defense and figured out where that money is actually going, I would rechannel the money away from international interests and foreign payments and industries and consultants, and I would start to channel that money back towards the military personnel, the troops. I would give them a raise. It doesn't make sense that you're spending $1 trillion on this and billions to different countries and industries while they're getting paid minimum wage. I would give a raise to the troops, and then I would task them with figuring out how they can use their resources inside the country. I would, and by the way, all of this can be done with, to my point of what the president can do versus what Congress can do. The president unilaterally can demand an audit of the Department of Defense. He can allocate where troops are, bring the troops back inside the U.S. And once they're inside the U.S. and working inside military bases inside the U.S. rather than Italy and Germany, we can also figure out things that they might be able to accomplish in the U.S. Not police tasks, by the way, because the military is not allowed to police the U.S. and civilians and cities. But what could they do? Well, there are some ideas. I think if you sat down with the military, there's some ideas you could come up with for what they could do inside the country with their skills. Instead of building infrastructure and bases in foreign countries, the infrastructure in the U.S. is awful. Maybe they could be tasked with improving the infrastructure in the U.S. And other things they could do. Maybe they could be tasked with building housing and take care of the homelessness problem. That's a possibility. Another possibility, maybe manning uh, shelters and food distribution for the homeless, and maybe that's a possibility. There's a lot of different things that they could do inside the country that's not military based, to the extent that we have troops still on the books, bringing them back from places like Somalia or wherever they are. And then number five is again, and I'm kind of reiterating this: cut all foreign military payments. There's uh, some countries get 30 billion a year. Some countries have gotten 100 billion. Again, you just can't afford that anymore. We would cut all those foreign payments, either reduce the budget altogether or spend it more wisely within the U.S. These are, again, some of these things. Getting back to the plan, some of these things can be done by the president via executive order, like closing the external bases, um, the audit, redeploying military personnel inside the U.S. to do domestic service. Other things you have to work with Congress on, and those can all be done in the first year, by the way. Other things you have to work with Congress on, like cutting the military budget 50%. We would put that in the first year budget and continue that on each year as well. We wouldn't slip back to constantly increasing it every year. And the military aid payments in the budget, cutting that all out would be working with Congress and then naming and shaming those that will not go along with that. Um, so that is point two on how we get control over the military industrial complex once again. And I'll see you in the next.